We observe the 5-minute rule for those who can't read it. Merci à tous et toutes d'être venus célébrer la vie de notre ami extraordinaire David Malone. Je suis particulièrement reconnaissant envers nos intervenants qui sont venus de loin pour être avec nous, ainsi que la merveilleuse petite équipe qui a organisé cet événement. D'autres amis prenant la parole aujourd'hui auront des souvenirs qui reflètent les nombreuses facettes de cet homme complexe, mais permettez-moi d'abuser un instant mon rôle. Les propres souvenirs de David remontent de nombreuses années, à une époque où nous travaillions ensemble à aider le ministère à gérer une transition entre gouvernements particulièrement délicate. Lui, il était la prime d'or et je fournissais la couverture, disons, nécessaire pour protéger son travail des nombreux intérêts concurrents au système qui cherchait à faire prévaloir leurs préférences. This preference, this partnership, I should say, which I sometimes thought of was like between my General Groves and his Oppenheimer, did the job. In the process, I came to understand how this solitary man was so profoundly social, how in him an uncompromising intellect found a place alongside deep empathy, how thick skin was a shield for a sensitive mind, how an intellectual restlessness was in him the necessary precondition to great accomplishment. I also came to understand how this apparently fragile person had an extraordinary level of self-discipline with which he was able to overcome the challenges that life puts in the way. We remained friends through the decades, and that friendship felt very special to me, and it was. But it was only one of many such genuine and deep friendships that David had developed throughout his life. It was perhaps his greatest gift, friendship. It was certainly the gift he gave so many of us. His loss left many of us with an inexplicable hole in our lives. Perhaps more important, in the broader context, is that in this chaotic world, his pragmatic and acute idealism would be a source of reassurance to all of us today. So in that sense, we mourn just as his passing, but that of the world which he worked so hard to make a better place. And with that, let the real meeting begin, and I hand you over to the most capable chairmanship of our Louise Fisher.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très heureuse que nous soyons si nombreux à vouloir honorer la mémoire de David Malone. Il y a beaucoup à dire, car David était un homme aux multiples facettes. Rares parmi nos collègues sont ceux qui ont joui d'une réputation d'excellence, autant comme universitaire et chercheur que comme diplomate. Nous serons nombreux, je pense, à souligner son extraordinaire versatilité, alliée à une intelligence hors du commun. Quand je pense à David, c'est d'abord en français. C'est une langue qu'il avait apprise jeune et qu'il maîtrisait parfaitement. Il avait vécu quelques années à Montréal comme étudiant à l'École des hautes études commerciales et avait même milité dans les mouvements de contestation de l'époque. Ça, j'avoue que ça m'a étonné quand j'ai appris ça. C'est en français que s'est déroulée notre dernière conversation, quelques jours avant son décès. Il aura été jusqu'à la fin un être d'une grande finesse, tout à la fois rationnel et rigoureux, en même temps que sensible, chaleureux et infiniment attentif à ses amis. I believe I met David for the first time when I arrived at the permanent mission in New York in January 1992. He was then leading the mission's economic section and had already acquired a formidable reputation with his colleagues at the mission as well as with his peers from other countries. When 6 months later, the time came to replace the then Deputy Permanent Representative, Philippe Kirsch, it was, as they say, a no-brainer. David was quite obviously the best candidate for the job. Just as he had shined in the economic job, he quickly made his mark as Deputy Permanent. This was an extraordinarily busy time at the UN. The world was emerging from the Cold War. Crisis in Bosnia, Rwanda, Haiti, and many other places kept the political section fully engaged. At the same time, a number of major conferences on economic and social issues generated mountains of work for the mission. As Deputy Permanent, David supervised the work of the entire team, taking particular care of junior officers. Many have told me, and I know there's a few here today, many have told me how important his guidance and support had been as they embarked in their new career. My colleagues progress, most of whom barely acknowledge the contribution of their own deputy, let alone someone else's deputy, were full of praise for David. I can count the number of times I was told how very lucky I was to have such a gifted number two, which indeed I was. Although he had his hands more than full with his job at the mission, David took on a teaching responsibility at NYU with Professor Tom Frank, a very distinguished international law scholar. And as this was not enough, I discovered that David was an avid consumer of New York's abundant cultural riches. Concerts, operas, plays, art exhibitions, he seemed to be able to take it all. He even wrote short film reviews for the famous Zagat restaurant guide. I therefore had the luxury of having my very own cultural advisor and food critic right there in the mission. Twice after his time at the permanent mission, David returned to the UN orbit, first as president of the International Peace Academy, an influential NGO close to the UN policy-making community, and then for the final 10 years of his career as rector of the UN University. I think for the first time and only time, UNU was led by someone who had not spent his entire career in the academic world. His tenure at UNU speaks to the enormous credibility David enjoyed in the two professional universes he had chosen. David is one of the most productive, efficient, and versatile persons I've ever had the privilege to work with. He was both a thinker and a doer, an outstanding analyst, and a great manager. Even under tremendous pressure, he remained calm, open, patient. He also had a great sense of humor and an easy rapport with people from all walks of life. David Malone a été pour moi un collaborateur exceptionnel, mais surtout un ami fidèle. J'ai admiré son intelligence, ses vastes connaissances, son intérêt autant pour les arts et la culture que pour les affaires du monde. C'était un être exceptionnel qui aura laissé sa marque partout où il est passé. Merci de votre attention. J'ai maintenant le plaisir d'appeler Justine Malone. Justine is David's niece, and she will say a few words. Thank you.
Puis, ici, j'aimerais dire quelques mots sur David au nom de sa famille. David était le dernier survivant d'une famille de 5 enfants. Et il avait 8 neveux et nièces, dont ma cousine Sarah, qui est ici aujourd'hui, et mes 2 frères, Julien et Nicolas. En plus de ses 8 neveux et nièces, David avait autant de filles qu'il aimait énormément et dont il parlait souvent. Et j'aimerais dire quelques mots de mon point de vue de David comme oncle. David was a great uncle. He was very, very unique. He knew everything and everybody. He lived all over the world. And when he came to visit, he'd come for a day and leave again. And it was always full of excitement. David was here because he was just so interesting and always so, so happy to see us and share his time with us. He was also a very generous uncle. He never forgot Christmas or our birthdays. And he had a great sense of humor. And we always very much appreciated the uniqueness of David. I have to say that all the siblings in that family were all some eccentric, but at the very least, they were all very unique. And David was also, like the others, he had really his own personality and his own way that I've never met or seen in anybody else. So I'm one of 8 nieces and nephews, but I think because I'm the oldest and maybe because I'm very, very responsible, he had designated me as his executor to take care of his estate towards the end of his life. I know initially he had asked Sarah and Liz to be his executor, but they have young children, and at one point he realized it was maybe a lot of work to ask somebody who had a family at the other end of the country. I'm actually very grateful to have had the opportunity, because I was his executor and David knew towards the end that his death was approaching. It gave me the opportunity to spend a lot of time with David that I would not otherwise have spent with him. So these duties that he had given me gave me the chance to become very close to him the last few months of his life. And the reason why I had not spent so much time with David was mainly because David was always abroad. He was always away and always traveling and always going from one place to the other to meet friends. So I actually am very grateful for the opportunity of having spent this much time with David. J'aimerais dire aussi quelques mots sur les derniers mois de David, parce qu'il y a certains de ses amis après sa mort qui m'ont exprimé, ou même avant sa mort, qui m'ont exprimé une incompréhension sur la décision de David et ce qui s'était passé dans l'année avant sa mort. Donc, en 2024, David était conscient du fait qu'il avait peut-être des problèmes cognitifs. Et c'est à l'été 2025 que David m'avait annoncé qu'il avait décidé de faire appel à l'aide médicale à mourir à cause de son déclin cognitif. Et David n'a jamais donné beaucoup de détails à qui que ce soit sur les détails de sa maladie ou sa décision. Mais vers les derniers mois de sa vie, la priorité de David était d'obtenir l'aide médicale à mourir. So David's main concern towards the end of his life was that he would get named. And it's hard for some of his friends or even me to understand why he wanted to get it so fast. Because when we interacted with David or had conversations or went out to dinner with him, he seemed fine and he had all his capacities. So a lot of us wondered and even asked him, are you sure you want to do it so soon? Why do you want to do it so soon? And David's big fear was that he would reach a point where he would not be able to consent to make it more. So once he had made the decision to get made, he wanted to do it because the decision had been made. He didn't want to wait any longer. But it's true that starting in September 2025, his condition did decline extremely fast, and David was aware of that. And that's what led him to make the decision to have made in November of this year, even though he was still very functional. I was with David, and some of his friends were with him as well on the day he died. And I was with him the morning that he was to get made. The doctor was coming at 1. And I asked him that morning, and he was in a very, very good mood that day. He was very anxious the night before, but the morning he got made, he was in a particularly good mood. And I had asked him, David, how do you feel? Don't you have some anxiety at the idea that you're going to die in a few hours? And he said, I feel nothing but relief. Je ne sens que du soulagement. And I could see that in him. It was obvious that he was very relieved that day and when he died, he told his friends and the people around him, I want everybody to know this is exactly what I wanted. And he seemed very
at peace. So despite the fact that him getting the ailment that caused him to make the decision to get married is tragic, I think the way he died and the date on which he died was something that actually gave David peace and relief. Une autre chose que David m'a dit avant de mourir, parce qu'on parlait beaucoup de son décès imminent, David m'a dit que malgré le fait qu'il n'avait jamais eu la chance dans la vie d'avoir une famille, qu'il avait été l'homme le plus chanceux au monde pour ses amis. Et il m'a dit, j'ai les meilleurs amis au monde, et pour ça, j'ai été très chanceuse. Et j'ai remarqué d'abord le nombre de gens qui m'ont envoyé des messages, ou même qui ont eu des rassemblements comme celui qu'on a aujourd'hui. Il y en a eu plusieurs. Il y en a un aux Nations Unies à New York, il y en a eu deux à Victoria, il y en a eu plusieurs. Combien les amis que David aimait tellement aimaient David en retour. Donc, David m'avait répété à peu près 15 fois, I do not want a funeral, I don't want a ceremony. Je suis contente que beaucoup de gens en aient eu quand même, parce que je sais que dans son fond, David aurait énormément apprécié. Il voulait simplement jamais être le centre de l'attention. Mais en même temps, je pense que tous les rassemblements qui ont eu lieu à son égard, il aurait fait énormément plaisir. Merci. Ma cousine Sarah est ici avec moi. Elle va lire un tribute qui a été écrit par un ami d'enfance de David qui s'appelle Hélène Le Bouddhiste, qui va dire quelques mots sur le David jeune que la plupart d'entre nous ont finalement jamais vu. Merci.
So I'm Sarah, David's niece, and I'm going to share this tribute from David's childhood friend, Hélène Le Bouddhiste. I met David in 1970. He was 16, I was 14. He was pretty much like he was as an adult, but faster. It's the first thing that amazed me about him. He was always rushing from one place to the other, or more likely from one event to another. It was hard to keep up with him. He was walking, I was running. He was a young man in a hurry. He was very social. On weekends, as soon as he got off the train from Pontoise in the northwest of Paris, where the boarding school Saint-Martin was located, he'd go somewhere to see someone. He'd always go to parties on Saturday evenings. He was already very organized. It was all planned well ahead. He knew how to make connections and ingratiate himself with those who would help him meet new people in the Paris society that was still relatively closed to newcomers. He was Canadian at a time when the French still thought about themselves as a great, powerful nation. General de Gaulle had died the same year we met. The French saw Canada like a provincial backwater. I remember him feeling he had been snubbed. He felt at ease with my family. We were Greek and my mother was Italian. Le cepaki et les macaroni. He loved my mother for the hospitality she offered him. She treated him like a son. He would share every Sunday dinner with us before rushing again to get his train for Saint-Martin. Although he had been schooled in French in Iran and in Saint-Martin, and then to HEC Montreal, it was clear to me he was not going to do like his elder brothers, Mark and Christopher, and live and work in French. He was close to them because he saw them more in Paris when they studied there, but they were mavericks to him, and he wanted to fit in the English-speaking world. He had a keen interest in politics, and especially Middle East politics. His stay in Iran had triggered it. He was ambitious and wanted to emulate his father, the ambassador, and his eldest brother, Tony, the future ambassador. He admired them. He was extremely driven. He had a clear direction in his professional life. He wanted to follow in their footsteps. It was his ambition then, and he was eager. He idolized his parents, especially his mother. Being the family baby, he had been much more spoiled than his four older siblings. and he knew exactly how to work on them to get what he wanted. I witnessed him at work in 1973 in Israel with his father, who was ambassador there. Diplomatic, caressing but determined, not taking no for an answer. I remember him coming back to me triumphant. He was very interesting, charming, witty young man, hyperactive, a bit of a social butterfly, but very smart when it came to politics and very serious about his friendships. There was nothing casual about that. You knew it in the moment you met him, and that it had nothing to do with his extensive network of acquaintances. We knew each other 55 years, and in spite of all, he was like a brother to me, sometimes annoying, but always there. I miss him.
He knew everyone who was anyone in Egypt. And so as a 26-year-old diplomat, I had the honor of setting up and then sitting in on these meetings with some of the biggest thought leaders in Egyptian 20th century history. We clicked in a way, I think, perhaps because his first posting had been to the Arab world as well. He went to Kuwait in the late 70s. And here I was in Egypt in the 1990s. He may have identified in some sense with the younger diplomat that I was at the time. And I certainly very much wanted to become the older diplomat that he was. He was a role model to me in his intellectual energy, in his passion for the work that he did, and his commitment to try and improving the quality of Canadian foreign policy, and also his remarkable pattern of jumping in and out of the foreign service as someone who's deeply restless to begin with. I saw in that a pattern that I wanted to emulate, and indeed I did. He, of course, managed to hop out and then hop in at a more senior position each time, and somehow leverage the extraordinary accomplishments in one career to then move farther up in the others, which is a feat I did not reproduce, and I'm not sure many other people could, other than the irrepressible David Malone. In his mentorship, though, I mean, I'm blessed to have had several mentors in my career. There's something really unique about the way that David approached mentorship. He had a very refined, very keen sense of what you were capable of. But then he was also quite unstinting in his assessment, searing sometimes of how far you were from reaching your potential. You could be really quite brutally honest in a way that I think many people shrunk from, but I found it really quite invigorating. He also had an unquestioned commitment to you. I mean, often with mentors, it might be for a certain period of your career, and then the two of you will grow apart and go to different things. Or perhaps it'll be more that you'll sort of tag along with the senior person from job to job. With David, the commitment was there for, as it turned out, the rest of his life. And through career changes in which he didn't approve or didn't really have any particular experience, and it was also through ups and downs. And not many mentors will stay with you through the downs. It was extremely frequent too. I mean, I would engage with him for every 2 or 3 months through over a course of 30 years, which is really quite a remarkable relationship. One that eventually occurred to me was about much more than mentorship. And when I thought about the unique approach that he had, he'd spend a lot of time thinking exactly what you're capable of. He really invested time into it. And then being so critical about the gap that remained, I started to recognize those characteristics and when my children were born, there was a paternal aspect to its commitment. And the clincher for me was every single time we met, no matter, just having a coffee at Bridgehead or what have you, he would always get out his very, very cheap digital camera and take really low quality, really bad quality photos, as if each and every moment counted and wanted to be remembered. When I think about we must have had 100 mentorship conversations, and why would you need to have 100 photos of us sitting together at various coffees around the world? But he wanted to capture every single moment in the same way that you do. So it's your child. Indeed, when my 3 children came along, Ava, Luke, and Mia, he was every bit as devoted to them as he would have been to the son of grandchildren. And when I heard about his decision to seek Maid, I struggled with it, as I know many of his friends did. And it forced me obviously to do a lot of thinking about what he represented to me. He never did marry, and he never did have children of his own, in spite of his obvious devotion to nephews, nieces, godsons, goddaughters, and in my case, my children. And I spent a lot of time wondering what he might have been had he been a father. But on reflection, he did promise something else. Now I would like to read a tribute that was written for David by Rory Stewart. Rory, as you know, is an adventurer, scholar, administrator, and was a minister in the Conservative government, and aspirant for the leadership of the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom. I got to know him in his time in Afghanistan. And he writes, David was one of the most widely respected diplomats and public servants of his generation. Deeply knowledgeable with a real wisdom about world events, he had particular sensitivity and imagination, which allowed him to seek and hear a challenge from unexpected places and people that others often overlooked, what other colleagues might have been wary to do. That meant that he often saw risks and developments which others had not foreseen. He was able to handle ambiguity and risk with courage and precision. He did this all with a great modesty and a profound sense of public service. He seemed to me to epitomize the very best we can. We need people like David, particularly at this moment. He will be so missed. That's it.
Well, David, of course, had several careers, and I'm going to talk about the academic end of it, the part where we first came into contact. I teach at the University of Toronto, and I teach in the International Relations program, and we were a kind of flexible, eclectic group. And sometimes people would show up and we'd look around and sort of do the physical and think, well, either suitable or non-suitable. One day, this fellow showed up in a joint seminar that we ran, history, political science, and economics. And we had pulled one of the academic maneuvers which was to get rid of our political scientists. Another question arose, well, who could replace him? And this fellow showed up, and he seemed friendly, and he seemed interested, and he seemed, more than seemed, to have a detailed knowledge of the subject, which of course is always a danger when you've got academics, because we know so much less of what's going on in the world. Anyway, David joined our fourth year seminar, and he was a star. I mean, he certainly outshone the people who were nominally giving the seminar, myself and Ian Drummond, and engaged immediately with the students. It was absolutely remarkable. We had usually 15, 20 students chosen from the very best at the university. And what I remember always is that afterwards or during the week, I'd spot David in the coffee shop, and there he would be engaged with one or another of them. When much later I did an interview with him, he remembered them, and he's mentioned them by name, and he got the characteristics, and it was so very sensitive to the people that he was engaged with. I mean, we all know, especially when you meet important people and you think they're fixing their gaze on you, you know perfectly well that they're looking over you for the next person coming along. That was never David. So we became friends. He had a talent, a real talent, an engaging, affectionate talent for friendship. And I always think of David as having that extra aura of sentiment, of affection. And although after 1987, we only saw each other occasionally, sometimes in New York, sometimes here in Ottawa. Whenever I came to Ottawa, there would be a lunch, and there would be David, and he would have somebody or other that he thought would be interesting. He had that talent for picking up a thread that might have been left 10, 15 years before, and there it would be with David. Most recently, last August, August of 2024, we did a series of interviews with David in what we call the Chrétien Project, in which Chrétien is kind of the chronological marker. I mean, some people think that he's the center of it, but really what it is a portrait of Canada, and especially of Ottawa, and within Ottawa, the Department of, well, whenever I speak its name, I feel like throwing up. GAC. Anyway, David very nicely sat down with us for about 5 hours. I think you may see an excerpt from it at the end of our speeches. And it really was remarkable. It's kind of biography of David. I mean, it goes from his childhood, it goes from his education in France, it goes through the Institut Commercial in Montreal, and then of course Harvard, Brookings, Oxford, all those points of academic contact that were, well, quite unique in his life. Some of the things in the interviews were very characteristic. And one of the things that I loved about David was that we could interchange sharpness. David, well, you know perfectly well, David did not suffer fools laughing, but he did see those fools as part of life's rich caravan. And he did occasionally favor me with a pursuit of some of these people, some of whom are still alive, so I will censor myself on it. And he spoke also very often in great appreciation for people who had helped him in his career. I perhaps even started with Pierre Trudeau, with whom he had a distant relationship, but David was thrown into doing a briefing note for Pierre Trudeau very early on. And, he frantically drew everything together and put it in the best possible form. And of course, it was in French because, David was as much a francophone, if not more a francophone, than he was an anglophone. And he got it back from Trudeau, and there were scribbles all over it. And it finally, what he said was a dreadful document, but written in exquisite French. And I think that really does sum him up. In a way, I'm sorry that David didn't become an academic and join the rest of us. On the other hand, he was too sharp, too eloquent, too perceptive, too clear, actually, to be an academic. Although, ironically, he did end up as the rector of the UN University in Tokyo, and a very successful one, so I understand. And again, of course, he followed it with his usual perception and his ability in this case. I don't know if this challenge occurred to him before, but essentially, I think he was given a mop and pail and told, we'll clean the place up. How do you get that? Well, I missed my friend of 40 years, and I regret that I won't hear his voice again, except, and if any of you are down in Toronto, you can read the transcripts of what David said, and you can read the parts that I'm censoring right now, and you can try and figure out, well, you won't have to do very much to figure out who he's talking about. And of course, Gordon Smith is there, very appreciative note. Louise Frichette, naturally. Marie Meunier, of whom he was very fond. And in the transcript, of course, what comes across is one of the things that he most admired about Marie was her, I suppose I can call it forthrightness. I don't know if it was expressive in French as it is in English, but one does deeply appreciate that kind of thing. Anyway, I also bring a note from his friend Margaret McMillan. Margaret was at Oxford when David was, and they had, again, a very happy, long connection. And she asked me if I would read her tribute. David Malone was a scholar and a gentleman. Like all of you who knew him, I have many happy memories of encounters with him over the years, from Oxford, Toronto, and Japan. He was the most interesting and engaging of conversationalists, and thoughtful and kind, with a great gift for friendship. My last meeting with him was in Oxford in June 2025, when he breezed in and gathered friends together as he had so often done before. He insisted on taking several of us to lunch, including Adam Roberts, a leading scholar of international relations and David's doctoral supervisor, Sam Dawes, like David, a scholar, diplomat, and Adam Swallow, his editor at the Oxford University Press. It was, as you can imagine, a very congenial lunch, and we talked about the state of the world. Towards the end, David said he would like to say a few words. He went round the table describing his friendships with each person that they mentioned. I think we were all touched, and in a rather English fashion, muttered that we valued his friendship too. Perhaps we thought no more about it. I now realize that he was saying goodbye, and I wish I could have said goodbye to him and told him more about why I liked him and admired him so much. So a heartfelt goodbye to you now, David. You are irreplaceable. Thank you.
And now we invite Jim Wright.
Good morning. Thank you, George and Liz, for organizing this gathering for David. It was wonderful to see so many friends here. David, of course, was many things: diplomat for Canada and for the United Nations, an academic, and an author. For me, he was a colleague and especially a lifelong friend. My memories of David are especially of that friendship over the years. We joined Foreign Affairs at much the same time. We both came from diplomatic families. And while we enjoyed different career paths, postings around the world, we always stayed in very close touch. When my wife, Donna, and I were on our first posting in Moscow in the late 70s, David was in the Middle East. Not surprisingly, few friends or family visited Donna and I in Moscow during the height of the Cold War. But David did. David came because his parents were very close to Robert Ford, our rather austere ambassador at the time. And I remember when David came, Fords were very generous hosts. But David was a young diplomat, and he wanted to do things that the Fords wouldn't do. And so David and I and Donna had a wonderful time together, a very special time. And I think what struck me, anyways, was this curiosity on the part of David. Wherever he was, he wanted to understand the history, especially the culture. And Moscow in the late 70s was incredibly exciting, and David was thrilled to be there. We have fond memories of spending time with David at, I think it was his crumbling old family cottage on Beach Lake. And crumbling it was. There was no electricity. You had to take a motorboat to cross the lake to get to it. But it was, they were always special times. And I remember the last time we did it, starting up the Silver engine and getting it to work and going across Beach Lake, probably about 10 o'clock at night in the summer, and the stars were out, and it was magnificent. It was just absolutely magnificent. Later on in our careers, David and I were ADMs together at Foreign Affairs. David focused on multilateral issues, and I was involved with international security. And we were together quite often at UN in New York, but also attending summits together, the G8 as it was then. The last one we attended together was in St. Petersburg, trying to solve with Prime Minister Harper and to some extent President Putin, the latest crisis in the Middle East. At that time, I think it was Lebanon. So some things sadly never change. When I was High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, David was completing his doctoral studies at Oxford University. And Donna and I remember on one special day getting a personal guided tour to the uniqueness that Oxford is. I mean, it was just, David was thrilled to be there. He was so excited about the work that he was doing, the mentors that he was meeting there, and the students. He was energized by being around students. He loved being a mentor. A number of other speakers have talked about that as well, but David was absolutely in his element. at Oxford. Lastly, I would simply observe that friendships were very important to David. As people here will know, he invested in those friendships. He did it faithfully, and he did it thoughtfully. His year-end letters to update all of us on his comings and goings were really quite extraordinary. And if he was passing through a city where we were living, he made a point of seeking us out every time, every time. Our last get-together was for tea at Zoe's at Chateau Laurier. And Donna and I, we were not aware of his circumstances. And David, I don't think was talking about that at the time. But it was a special get-together with top families. He knew our kids. I don't think he'd ever met Nicholas or Nancy, but he knew of them intimately because he would always talk to us about our family. And I think what I would remember maybe the most about Dave was that funny laughter of his. It was uniquely Dave. And as I was coming here today, and Donna and I were exchanging stories, we both remarked about, what an extraordinary individual he was. Great sense of humor, one of a kind, and gone too soon. I'd like to read a thoughtful tribute to David from a friend of his, Shashi Tharoor. Shashi, of course, parliamentarian, member of the Lok Sabha, former Undersecretary of the United Nations, noted public intellectual and author like David, who was a close friend of David. And I quote, David's life was one of service, intellect, and friendship. He embodied the skilled diplomat's gift for listening, the rigorous scholar's gift for clarity, and the human gift for kindness. His departure is not only a personal loss, but a reminder of the fragility of all that we value in one another, wit, warmth, and the capacity to connect. Yet his choice also compels reflection. In electing to end his life before Alzheimer's could erase his lucidity, David asserted a final act of active agency. He refused to let the disease dictate the terms of his existence. For him, dignity lay not in the prolongation of life at all costs, but in the choosing of the moment when farewell will be conscious, deliberate, and surrounded by friends. And here you are. Thank you.
Now I invite Vinton Miller to say a few things.
Good morning, everyone. David Malone was president of the International Development Research Center from 2008 to 2013. And he was my boss for this 5-year, 2008 to 12, and remained a friend and colleague thereafter. Even before he joined IDRC, many of us knew him as a formidable intellect, a formidable thinker, an actor of policy maker. And this was through his associations with the Global Issues Bureau at GAC, his stewardship of the International Peace Academy, which was a partner of IDRC, in fact, and his tenure in New Delhi as a High Commissioner, where many of us met him as well. Even so, his entry to IDRC was special. It is now a matter of public record that at his first staff encounter, piece of said something to the effect of, if you've been here 10 years or more, you've been here too long, and you should be thinking about what you do next. And, this was always taken in the spirit in which it was meant, in an organization that people who'd studied soil science in Africa for 35 years on behalf of Canada and so on. But by the same token, most of us knew what he meant and what was behind those words. He was warning us, and he would know that well, having seen bureaucracies around the world. He was warning us about the perils of fossilization. He was reminding us about the importance of remaining vital. And above all, he was reminding us that he led by example. When we saw his career, we saw exactly what he meant by, if you've been doing something 10 years, you've been doing it too long. It is also the case that he could be charming and generous with his time, especially with young people. When the seniors kind of went to his office and came out, it was often an apprehensive sight. But the young people at IDRC had a different version of David. David, oh yeah, we were having lunch with him in the cafeteria, and he sat down with us and we talked about, name the subject. David could have an informed and mentoring conversation with young people who really appreciated his style at a time when we needed that. David was a strong believer in projecting IDRC through intellect and ideas and not just projects. And it is in this spirit that he completed his still cited, still seminal book, especially by Malone on Indian foreign policy, The Elephant Stance, completed at IDRC. He initiated a project of a massive volume, 900 and something pages, on international development ideas and practice, in which he drew many of us in, had OUP publish it, was on the OUP website as a most recommended book for almost 10 years thereafter. And I still come across academics who use that book in their courses around the world. He created a speaker series and regular salons at IDRC. And he was doing this at a time when it should be said in Ottawa, words like international development, research, and center were not in vogue. And I think that was a source of latent and sometimes not so latent frustration on the part of David. But most of us knew exactly where he was coming from and why he felt that way. These kinds of eras come and go. He had inherited a very good system, and frankly, if I may say so myself, a good organization from the Gordon Smith, Maureen O'Neill era. And he addressed it that way. He treated it with respect. He was especially respectful of the ethos that drove IDRC, which was to treat other countries not just as recipients, but as partners, and in his own thinking, as he reflected, as players. And so much of the talk that I now hear about middle countries and changing global governance, David was espousing those views often in a lonely manner 10, 15, 20 years ago. He was a great admirer of rising powers and flux in global government. Therefore, his transition to the United Nations University was almost a natural and in many ways extension of his IDRC era. Two quick thoughts. When he announced his departure for Tokyo, my first reaction, and Ben alluded to this, was exactly, he's finally moving to a country that appreciates cameras as much as he does. And the second was I think that is well. It was Mark Carney who said, you and you, no basketball team, no cheerleaders, what kind of university is this to do? David knew exactly what kind of university he was going to, and in fact, made the changes and brought the rigor, and a couple of speakers alluded to that, in ways that prior rectors had not done. He was very hospitable every time I and others would be in Tokyo. His beautiful area apartment at the top of the building was ours to keep. He moved a good but frankly languishing institute called the Center for Policy Research, which was in Tokyo, not exactly at the crossroads of global policy, moved it to New York and has therefore inserted the UNU and its various components into the UN discourse in ways that would not have been possible had it remained in Tokyo, and in ways that would not have happened had David not initiated that move. He poached several people from IDRC into the UNU system. He appointed many of us to different honorifics in the UNU system. And in many ways, I thought that this was exactly what Canada should be projecting to people and to policies and politicians around the world. When I saw him in the fall of 2023 with Mark-Claude in New York, he was a very relaxed person. He had retired from the UNU. He had just finished teaching his course at NYU. He was very happy about his successor. In typical David-like way, he had very pithy observations about the French and Canadian character by his dealings with contractors for his home in France and his condo in Victoria. And he was looking forward to retirement. He was looking forward to not doing stuff, not being always busy. He was not seeking out things to do and consultancies and appointments and so on. He was really looking forward to time to be with himself, his friends, and his family, and his two beautiful homes. And so the tragedy of David's passing is that we all have lost a friend and colleague and a mentor, but also that it was unfair that for someone who was as driven and workaholic as David was, he did not get the span of time that he deserved for himself and to enjoy life in ways that perhaps he hadn't previously. But he had already gone miles before he chose to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now invite Jim Mitchell.
Louise, chers amis, ça me fait énormément plaisir d'être ici avec tout un groupe des amis de David. He was an extraordinary guy. I'm going to start off my remarks now with a message from former Prime Minister Joe Clark, someone who was also, as we know, a great foreign minister. David Malone was one of the most forward-looking people I've ever met. Curious, informed, and gifted at recognizing opportunities and guiding change. I counted on him in many ways, and I'm very grateful to have known him and to have counted him as my friend. So that's a message from Joe Clark of Victoria. So it's my task to say a few words about David as a friend. Many of us knew him as a colleague. Many people knew him both as a colleague and as a friend. I want to talk about our friendship with David because he was a great friend to my family, to Margaret, and to our two sons, Jack and David. I first met David in 1981 or 82. I was a junior officer in POL, if anyone remembers what POL was. And David was one of the assistants to de Mont-Saint-Machin. And I forget where the meeting took place or what it was about, but I never forget meeting David and seeing him on that occasion. And somehow, although our work didn't actually intersect very much, we became good friends. He was immensely generous, as everyone has said so far today. He cared about his friends. He cared about families, as Justine has said. And he loved all of us. He was a people person in the very best sense of the word. In fact, I think it was his relationships that helped him deal with the demons in his own life. But he did deal with them, and his friendships were what sustained him. In our case, our friendship was situated not only in Ottawa, and especially at Beach Lake, as Jim has said, but also in the many places where he lived and where we as a family went to visit. And I can count at least 6 or 7 of those, and I'm sure many of you in this room would echo the same things. In New York, in Oxford, in Delhi, in France, at his country place in Burgundy, in Tokyo, in the apartment that Hinton just mentioned, and on more occasions than I can remember at the cottage on Beach Lake that Jim Wright described so very well, the cottage that he shared with David Johnston. And so what do I remember for those occasions? Well, I remember that David didn't cook. He simply ate out. He ate out for 50 years. And he never ate very much. I remember books and CDs and catalogs from art exhibitions. I remember a clean, simple environment in every home that we visited. I remember, as others have said, that he seemed to know almost everyone. He had a world-class Rolodex. Did you all know that in his early years, he was personal friends with Mick Jagger? I didn't know that. And that in his later years, he was close friends with the Crown Princess of Japan. But he was too modest to tell people about that, and I wondered whether I should say that, but why not? This is now is the time for remembering. Now, one of our personal connection to David, for about 5 years, he rented our condo. And of course, he was an active domestic diplomat, and he entertained a lot. And almost everybody in Ottawa that I know has been to David Malone's place. I stopped trying to correct him. But, his gift for friendship was one of his greatest strengths. He befriended, as others have said, younger writers and scholars and diplomats, and he cared about younger officers. He cared about our 2 sons, whose lives and careers he followed closely. He was close to Margaret, who asked me to share this one very short anecdote. So this is Margaret's anecdote about going to the NAC with David. One evening at the NAC, an older woman came up and sat a few rows in front of us. She was elegantly dressed in an emerald green suit with a small matching hat and gloves. David turned to me and said, "Never forget the importance of dressing with style, especially as you get older." So that was, I have a picture in my mind's eye of that woman and his sage advice, and I do my best to live up with it. So says Margaret Mitchell. So although he was probably the most cultivated and sophisticated person I've ever known, David had a profound affinity with the Canadian landscape, with the natural environment around Ottawa, and notably the cottage at Beach Lake. He loved canoeing, he loved barbecuing, campfires. We brought him up to our cottage, and he brought with him a young friend from India, a nearly blind artist whom he had befriended in Delhi. He wanted to show this young Indian what Canada was really all about. And for that purpose, he brought him up into the Upper Gatineau. Did any of us really know the whole David Malone? I'm not sure. I know I saw part of him. I know we could speak frankly, and we spoke often in the several weeks before he died. He had a remarkable clarity of vision and purpose, as others have said so well. He was incredibly hardworking, immensely productive. He was a patriot. He was steadfast in his commitment to Canada and to the well-being of humanity. He left life on his own terms, and he was truly a great Canadian and a great friend. So David Malone, as we knew him. Thank you.
Our final speaker this morning is gone.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and to have been asked to say a few words about my friend David. I have to say as well that I've been very moved by what I've heard today, and the wonderful tributes have been given. And I hope I'll be adequate to the task of saying a few words myself. Saul and Paul were dear friends. And both our fathers do the old department very, very well, and would always talk about it with affection and lots of laughter and jokes. And I can remember my father doing something which was, I'm sure, illegal. When I was visiting my dad in New York, he shared with me a telegram from Paul Malone, who was in Tel Aviv, and my dad was in New York. And he wanted me to see what reporting was all about, and how the reporting often reflected where you were, the post that you were at. And so he showed me the telegram. This was not the first telegram my dad. She started showing me telegrams when I was like 10 years old. So I went, okay, read this. And it was after my father died, I went through his diaries and my mother's diaries, and the book will follow where he's coming eventually. And there was a wonderful note by my mother who noted in her diary that young David Malone was coming, such a delightful boy. And I think of that description because it really reflected what he was. He had a continuing boyish quality, which never left him. And when we finally started getting to know each other as adults, it was through my work initially at the Forum of Federations, which was a terrific project started by Prime Minister Chrétien and Stéphane Dion, looking at the world of international governance, which is still going. And I started meeting with David and talking to him about the project and what did he think and how could it fit into what was going on in the world. And he was immediately, he grasped it. Yes, this is great, terrific. Let's work on this. Let's do it. So he'd be sending me, bombarding me with messages. Why don't you think about this? Why don't you think about that? And it would never stop. Just kept going like that. He was always engaging with me in my various careers. And our career paths, so far as I can be said to have had a career, our paths crossed so often, and always as if when we met, it was always as if it's not that we hadn't seen each other in a long time, because it didn't matter. We just took it up where we left off, with the same sense of enthusiasm, interest, care about Arlene, the kids, the family. My mother lived on to be well over 100. And it was an incredible friendship. And all of us have spoken about this gift that he had. Ian Forster once famously said, what's the secret to your life? He said, always connect. David, always connect. He never left a thread untouched. He never dropped anybody. He didn't like everybody. I hope he liked me. When I was there, he was very kind to me. But seriously, he just always connected. And because he lived a life alone, which was a particular challenge of his throughout his life, he nevertheless developed this extraordinary capacity to connect and to link and to make a life and to make connection and to become a friend and to become a mentor, to be all the things that he was in the various aspects of his extraordinarily rich and vital life. He knew that because he passed through and did so many different things and did them well, academics would love to seize him as theirs. Diplomats would love to seize Canadian diplomats and so on as one of ours. At the UN, he was a key UN person.
Every UN Secretary General that he worked for needed him, loved his advice, cared for his selfless sense of service and devotion to the public good. Jim said, did we know all of David? The answer is no, none of us did. But the part that we got to see was quite extraordinary and has made a lasting impact on all of us. One of our linkages through life was friends. We both loved friends. On a beaucoup aimé la France. Il parlait beaucoup mieux que moi en français, mais quand même, on a discuté toutes les choses. D'accord. I had the benefit of meeting at the end of his life a French politician by the name of Edgar Pisani. In this audience, some people would know who Edgar Pisani was. But the reason I knew was that as a kid in Geneva, there were only two channels on television, the French channel and the Swiss channel. Well, we watched the French channel. And it was during the rise of General de Gaulle's government. And Pisani was a young socialist who had been chosen to be the Minister of Agriculture when he was in his 30s. And he was a remarkable guy because he was very good on TV. He was very good at talking and describing what was going on and saying what was happening. And I can remember telling David this story, which he really totally enjoyed, and said that's exactly everything that Edgar Pisani believed in, and he's so right. So I'll get to the story in a minute. But Pisani spent the last 10 years of his life, 15 years of his life in Canada, visiting because for personal reasons. And he called me up. I just been defeated, one of my several defeats, but the most important defeat was the 95 when I was defeated as premier. He called me up and he said, Mr. Ray, you don't know me, my name is Edgar Pisani. I said, are you the Edgar Pisani from France who was the Minister of Agriculture? He said, oh my God, no way. So we chatted and he said, I think you and I have something in common and I want to meet with you and talk with you. So we became friends. And we just talked about life and politics and issues and how to settle disputes. And he was a great mediator. Eventually he became Gilbert New Caledonia in France. He was an international mediator, extraordinary man. When he died, of course, his friends gathered together and we were all invited to Paris, not for an event like this, but for a very different event, which was a colloque. So in Paris, you don't just say hello to somebody, you have to have a meeting about it, it has to be properly structured. And we all talked through the day. We talked, it was a gathering of people, we talked. There was one fellow keeping notes very carefully. And said, okay, now at the end, now we have to gather up, what is it, Edgar, what's the sentence? What is the thing that brings us together? And he said, Pisani believed in three things. I told David the story, but I'm telling it to you because it's really also about David. He said, Edgar believed in three things. The first thing he believed in was that it was more important to listen than to talk. That it was only by listening that we actually begin to understand what is going on in the world. And we begin to realize that we are not the most important thing going, that it's what other people are doing, what other people are experiencing that is the most important. And that for most people, dialogue and conversation consist of two things. One is talking, and the other is waiting to talk. And that very few people actually know how to listen. But Pisani would say, listening is the most important thing. It's the most important quality to have as a human being. He said the second thing is that in engaging with other people, you should always start your thinking, not necessarily how you phrase the sentence, but you should always start with a thought in your own mind that what you're about to say could be wrong, and that you might be mistaken. But then nevertheless, in order to engage in a conversation, you have to start with something. So you start knowing with great humility that you could be wrong. Now, I think of the political discourse today. Look at the House of Commons. Listen to what everything I was, practiced in my own political career. You never start with the premise that you could be wrong. You know you're right. And so you're capable of listening, and you're just starting out and this is your statement. This is the way it goes. But really, if you want to get to a resolution of some kind of conflict or some issue, you need to start from the premise that you might be wrong, and you're not scripting the conversation, you're listening to the conversation. And the third thing is that you live your life in such a way that you create the space where the first two things could actually happen. That's how you live your life. And I told this to David when we were having one of our many gatherings in New York. And, we stopped and he said, gee, that's so true. And the reason that I thought of it as I was preparing what I was going to say today is that that's how David lived his life. That's what David Malone was all about. He was about listening. And above all, he was about humility, knowing that there was more to learn. And that's everything he did. He didn't stop learning. He didn't stop engaging. He didn't stop, he went back to university, went to Oxford in relatively advanced years. He said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my PhD. He felt going to move on in life. And he did it. He did in that spirit. So we have been, had the opportunity to have a fellow traveler on what Bob Rothwell calls the caravan of life. He's left the caravan earlier than any of us would have wanted. But as we've also seen, he left it on his own terms. He did not want to linger in a way that would not reflect on his dignity and on his life. So, David, we celebrate you and certainly love you very much.
Well, thank you to all the speakers. We have one final voice to hear this morning.
That's very kind. I hope to come next year or the year after. This year I can't because I simply have too many things lined up, including a visit to India. I did get my visa for India. And I have a home in France, so I need to show up there if only for administrative reasons every now and then, but I do love being there some of the year. And I'm going back to Japan because something very funny happened after I got to Victoria, just after I got to Victoria. I got a phone call from my former secretary at UNU saying, it's something very unusual. We had a phone call from the Imperial Palace asking if you would accept an honor from Japan. And I said, well, I'm delighted, but actually Canadians aren't allowed to accept foreign honors. You have to ask permission from the Privy Council office or somebody to who it was. And she said, oh no, but they've already done that. So It's already approved. So, but the question is, are you willing to accept its honor? And I said, well, what is it? Well, she said it's the highest honor any foreigner can win. And I said, but why would I be getting that? Well, at least because my first 5 years were pretty contentious. And she said, well, we don't know how it came about, but I'll just pass on now that you can, you're delighted, you're grateful. But it involves a presentation of this huge cordon and a huge sort of bulging. It looks like something out of the Pirates of Penzance. And so I didn't want to receive it from the emperor in Tokyo because I knew that my successor, no matter how good he is probably not going to be offered that honor. Why? Not because he's African at all, but because I had a personally very close relationship with the emperor and empress and the emperor's parents. And I also know the empress's parents very well. So it was somehow a very close relationship, which meant that I saw the emperor and empress, or when they were crown prince and crown princess, often. And I saw the previous emperor and empress often. So my intuition was they might have something to do with it. But I did call up, as I say, the foreign ministry guy, who was my opposite number, and said, who's behind this? And he said, well, we're asking ourselves the same question. We're absolutely stupefied. So then I knew it was the Imperials themselves when they come. But I don't want to embarrass my successor by receiving something he's unlikely to receive, because he's unlikely to have quite the relationship with them. He's a family man, for one thing. The imperial family felt terribly sorry for me as a single guy, amongst other things. And so that's what I'm doing at the end of the month. I'm dropping in Tokyo on the 13th of October. I've arranged to receive this, whatever it is, from the consul general in Vancouver. But I wanted to go back to Tokyo to privately thank the emperor and empress and his parents, if they're still seeing, undesirables like me. That's
wonderful way to conclude this tribute. But before we do, I do want, on behalf of all of us, to thank George, and his wonderful team, Elizabeth Etherington, Angela Mockton, Lillian Thompson, and Gilles Breton. We owe you a great thank you for having organized this event. Thank you all. For people who want to join in the lunch, I think we are expected at the restaurant at noon. But I think you're all invited to stay here for the next little while. We have, it's such a great pleasure to find so many former colleagues and friends. So I think we'll be happy to spend a few minutes just talking amongst ourselves before those of us who've chosen to go to the lunch depart for the restaurant. So thank you all for being here.